welcome to the Tuesday extended edition of Point of View. This is the live stream we do on Tuesdays, the extra half hour you get of Point of View every week. Point of View is the show where we make your 2020 better one Monday at a time, and also an extra half hour on Tuesdays. And welcome to the show. And we have lots to talk about. Of course, there's all kinds of election news. Of course, there's all kinds of other things to talk about. But this is now our first Tuesday stream in December, and we really wanted to get to this question that lots of people assume to be true, that we're going to try to point out is not true, and that is the question of Christmas. Now, there is an absolutely, I think there's really no question that there is a attack on Christmas, there's a war on Christmas. It's really a war on Christ in our society. And, saying Merry Christmas has long time been considered, politically incorrect. You're supposed to say Happy Holidays. But there's also this assumption that Christians are idiots because they worship Christmas, which is really worshiping pagan gods, because Christmas was founded on pagan holidays. And this is the question I want to address. Is Christmas pagan? A lot of Christians just accept it, say, yeah, Christmas originally was pagan, but we're not worshiping the pagan stuff. We're worshiping Christ. And that's good. I think that's a wonderful thing. But I want to challenge that assumption. Did Christmas originate with pagan holidays? Is that where we get Christmas from? And there's also a lot of pagan holidays where people will say, oh, look, the whole worship of Christ stemmed from these other worships of these other pagan deities. Your Jesus is just an amalgamation of pagan deities, and the proof is all in the pudding of the Christmas pudding, right? So we're going to tackle that, and it's probably going to take us a couple. We put it down the label as Is Christmas Pagan Part 1, because we are very confident we're not going to cover it all in one episode, one 30-minute episode, but we're going to do our best to get as much in this time. We may do 2 episodes. I think more likely we're going to do 3, but God willing, we'll be done by Christmas. Joining me, of course, is co-host of Point of View, Justin Barnes. And Justin, thank you for joining the show today, because this is our show. It's not really joining. But Justin, give me an intro to this topic for you, why this is important, and why do you think that this is something that people shouldn't just turn off and say, I don't care, I'm just worried about election stuff right now.
Well, I mean, okay, so first of all, we're coming on the Christmas season, so, get your mind off politics for a few moments, please. Do yourself a favor and just stop thinking about political stuff for just a little bit, and maybe focus, I don't know, on the birth of our Savior. That might be a good idea. But the thing is, first of all, you mentioned people who say, you know what, I'm not worshiping pagans, I'm worshiping Christ, I'm celebrating the birth of Christ. I'm totally fine if that's what people want to say, but I would rather you have the right information to back that up. So if you want to say, maybe there are pagan roots, but you know what, I don't think any particular day is pagan, I'm going to celebrate the birth of Christ, I'm fine with that. But I don't think that that is actually the truth. So that's why I want to go here, because I think so often we cede so much ground that isn't necessary. And it really is based off this idea, and it really is an atheistic perspective that assumes this sort of parallelomania when it comes to religion in general, and that is all religions are just sort of borrowing from other religions because all religions are just made up by man. And so if we cede that ground, we are already starting on a very, very big disadvantage when it comes to engaging on this ideological front. So when they try to point out that Christmas, December 25th, is this pagan thing, they're not just making the claim that we have the wrong date for the birth of Christ. They're saying this whole thing is a sham, and the fact that Christmas is borrowing from, a half dozen other religions is the proof. So that's why I think it's important that we fight this ideological ground. And also, I happen to like Christmas, so sue me,
Yeah. I love Christmas. I really do. I don't know if I want to say it's the best holiday, because I really love Easter, and I think it's so underappreciated by Christians. Even though Christians do appreciate it, I just feel like it's underappreciated. However, yes, I love Christmas. I love the fact that it's a holiday that kind of just happens over 2 months' time, and we get to slot off 2 months of our year and just celebrate Christmas for the whole 2 months. And then you never have a free weekend in December as an assistant pastor, because there's always some party, some Christmas party, some choir rehearsal, something going on. So I love Christmas. But let's talk about it, okay? Because we want to be biblical, and again, this is the show where we take every issue and we look at it from the lens of the Bible, right? And so here's the first accusation that I wanted to kind of deal with, and that is Christmas in the Bible? Like, are the early Christians in the first century, after Jesus dies and ascends into heaven, or is resurrected and then ascends into heaven, are these early Christians celebrating Christmas as far as what we can tell in Scripture? I think the answer is no, right?
Well, the way you framed the question, you're correct. However, Christmas is celebrated in the Bible. Like, they celebrated the birth of Christ. That was a thing. Like, that's what the wise men came. They were there to celebrate his coming. John, it says, leapt in the womb to celebrate the Messiah coming. Like, so there is some precedent that this is something that is worth celebrating. But no, we don't see this yearly tradition of celebrating the birth of Christ on December 25th in the New Testament. So yeah. I think we ought to differentiate, because I think we do have biblical grounds to say this is something we're celebrating, but we don't have, all right, and Christians, thou shalt worship on December 25th to celebrate the birth of our Savior. That's not in the Bible. No.
Right. So while the book of Acts, which really gives us the accounts of Christian activities after the resurrection, doesn't give us a specific yearly celebration on the birthday of Christ, doesn't mean that it wasn't actually celebrated on the actual day. Maybe not an annual celebration, but when Jesus was born, it was celebrated for sure in heaven, and it's certainly a good reason. I don't think it's a mandate that Christians celebrate Christmas, but I think it's a good reason to celebrate Christmas. I mean, we have, let's say we have the angels. So God specifically sent angels to celebrate the birth of Christ. We have shepherds who definitely celebrated it and then went and told everyone about it. Let's see, the wise men, not on the same day. We
day, but yes,
we understand the wise men came probably a year or two later. And then it's also mentioned in 3 out of the 4 Gospels. So these Gospel writers, the early believers in the first century, thought it was important to make sure that people knew about the events surrounding the birth of Christ and the celebration of that time. So whether they were actually celebrating it yet at that point, I think probably not annually, but it was certainly something that they felt was worth celebrating, right?
Yeah, and for what it's worth, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later when we talk about the dating of Christmas, but for what it's worth, when the early church is discussing the date of Christmas, there's an east-west divide. Again, we'll probably get into that in a little bit, but one of them does appeal to apostolic tradition, as we can trace back to the apostles as to why we hold this date. I'm always very skeptical when people make those claims in the early church, because a lot of times it's like, well, nobody believes that. But, I mean, for what it's worth, they do claim to be able to trace back to the apostles as to around what the date was. So it's just an interesting tidbit.
Right.
If you're inclined to believe that. So
let's get to the real question. The first accusation I think that's brought is Christmas isn't in the Bible. You're making it up. You're celebrating that because you're adopting pagan holidays. That's an accusation that's made really by Jehovah's Witnesses and people who believe that. But let's talk about the date, because this is kind of where they say, because you chose December 25th to worship or to celebrate the coming of Jesus as an infant, you are celebrating pagan holidays and calling it a Christian holiday. What you don't even realize that you're actually celebrating pagan holidays. And there's a whole list, and we won't get to all of these today. We're going to walk through them one by one. But there's Mithras, Horus, Dionysius, if I pronounced that right. Dionysus, Saturnalia, the Natalis Sol Invictus celebration of the Romans. And then there are also, we're not going to get to this today, but there's also the Roman cult of Asherah that supposedly put up trees in their house and decorated them. And then there's, of course, the question of Santa Claus. Is Santa Claus really a pagan character that was adopted for Christianity, and all of this stuff? So we have a whole chock full slate that we're not going to get through today, but stay with us, because every Tuesday we're going to be releasing one of these episodes, probably for the next 3 weeks. Today, next week, and then probably the following week as well. But let's start with the first one. And this one, Justin, I want to ask you about. This is Mithra. So the claim that's made, I think the one that made it popular was Zeitgeist on YouTube. But the claim that they make is that there was this god, Persian god named Mithra, who was born of a virgin, who was born on December 25th. And by the way, this is 1200 BC, so 1200 years before Christ. They claim that they worshipped a god named Mithra, who was, according to what Zeitgeist claims, that Mithra was born of a virgin. Mithra was born on December 25th. Mithra had 12 disciples. Mithra performed miracles, was dead for 3 days, was resurrected, and then also they worshipped Mithra on Sunday, the Mithra cult. So it looks like, if that claim is true about Mithra, it does make it look like the worship of Christ was just taking the worship of Mithra and changing the name to Jesus, and the whole thing was invented. And when we celebrate the 25th as December, we're actually revealing that our Jesus is not original. He comes from Mithra. Is that correct, Justin?
Yeah. So this is where.
Uh-oh. Okay. We lost him just for a second. Justin, you're back now. Yeah, we can see
okay,
you.
Good. This is where it kind of boggles my mind. Here.
And you're gone again. All right, now you're back.
Can you hear me?
Go for it.
All right.
I'm gonna just pause this for a second here.
I don't.
Okay, and we're back. Justin's there. We have our connection, and so we look like we're good. So we were talking about Mithra, but I want to back up for just a second, because all of these things that they claim that we get them from Mithra. But before we talk about whether Mithra is actually everything they said, did we really even get this stuff from Mithra, right? I mean, the fact that Jesus had 12 disciples, we didn't get from Mithra. We got from the New Testament, the actual historical records, and we have multiple people who've recorded the fact that he had 12 disciples, right? The fact that he died, was buried, rose again, these are actual documented historical facts. So these are not things that we're getting from we know historically that these actually do come to us from historical happenings. So the fact that there's something else that might seem to parallel it doesn't mean that we don't get these from historical sources. And most of these are all things we get from the Bible, but there is one of those that's notable that we don't get from the Bible, and that's the date. And so this is why the date, celebrating Christmas on the 25th, becomes so controversial, because the Bible doesn't actually say that Jesus was born on the 25th per se. So let's talk about the date, and then we'll get to Mithra. And maybe we can get all that in today. I don't know. We'll see. So, Justin, what do you know about the December 25th? Does worshiping on December 25th mean that we're worshiping Mithra or one of these other cults we're going to talk about later?
Well, here's the thing. The common thing I've actually heard pretty much my entire life is, even from people who don't believe Christmas is pagan, is, well, it wasn't December 25th, obviously. I mean, we know it wasn't. That couldn't be the actual date. We know it was probably, July or something like that. And the common argument you'll hear is from those who either say, well, we got that from pagans, or, the Bible says there are sheep in the field and you wouldn't have sheep in the field at that time of the year, which is not actually true. But so do we have, first of all, I want to deal with those arguments. But
yeah, because I hear that one a lot. Oh, you wouldn't have
evidence.
I know a lot of honest, good, godly Christian people. I'm not just talking about Jehovah's Witness here, that will say, no, definitely wasn't the 25th because there were sheep out in the field. Sheep wouldn't be in the field in December. Can you address that real quick? Because that one I hear a lot.
Yeah, so first of all, they absolutely would be if they had a nice mild night, because the climate there, even in winter, you could have a mild period where it's way less expensive to let your sheep go out into the field than have to store them and buy food and grain and all that sort of stuff for them. So if you had a mild night, you absolutely would have your flocks out in the field. But even if it wasn't a mild night, there was always a flock in the field, and that was the flock for the sacrifices. So there is no problem with having sheep in the flock, even in the dead of winter. No matter what, there would be flocks in the field. Just the question really is just how many of them.
Yeah.
The Bible doesn't say that.
This is actually really interesting, because when the Lamb of God, who is the sacrifice for the sins of the world, is born, it's very likely that these shepherds that the angels appeared to were watching the sacrificial flock. We don't know this for sure, but it's possible this was the sacrificial flock that was maybe even giving birth to little lambs as they're watching it, that are going to be later sacrificed. It's a neat parallel that
it's a possibility.
Could be possible.
Yeah,
so anyway,
a possibility, but
definitely could have been December 25th. We can't rule it out because of sheep. What are our other reasons to actually believe that it was the 25th?
Yeah, so I think one of the great evidence is there's a couple pieces of evidence I want to present. But first you have to understand, in the early church, there was a debate about this between the East and the West. So in the East, they actually had a different date, and that was January 6th. Now, what's funny is when you know the song, The 12 Days of Christmas? Everyone thinks that's like, oh, the 12 days leading up to Christmas. No. What that comes from is that there's 12 days between the date that the West had, which was December 25th, and the date that the East had, which is January 6th. You have 12 days in between, so those are the 12 days of Christmas. That's actually what it is. The date that the East had for January 6th can be traced to, at the minimum by historians, to the early 200s. Wow. Now, the thing is, when you see it in sources, they're talking about it as like a passing comment about it, which indicates this is already an established belief. So most likely, the idea that January 6th is Christmas goes probably into the 2nd century.
So we're saying that there's historical documentation from as early as 200 years after the death of Christ, or actually less than 200 years after his death, about 200 years after his birth, that shows that people were already 200 years afterwards were celebrating Christmas on January 6th, assuming that was the day that he was born. And that's only a few hundred years after the death of the people who were there to meet Jesus and to know when his birthday was.
Right, and again, the way that they're talking about it is a way that indicates it was already an established belief, meaning it goes into the 2nd century, almost guaranteed it goes into the 2nd century, this belief. So you're talking like a generation or a generation and a half from the apostles, and that's where you've got the belief of January 6th as Christmas. And not long after that, you have December 25th, can be traced probably to the 250s. So both of these dates are extremely early, and this is where the debate comes from the church.
Okay, so we have this historical documentation that the early church was worshiping, kind of was divided on these two different dates, January 6th or December 25th. Why were they so sure that it was one of these two dates?
Well, the Eastern Church claimed January 6th, and they claimed that they had apostolic evidence that they could point to, trace themselves back to the apostles. Whereas the West, there seemed to be this underlying idea that Mary was visited by the angel on March 25th. So there's sort of this widespread acceptance of that, and so you just sort of extrapolate the math out there. That puts you at December 25th. If she conceived on March 25th, is sort of the idea, then December 25th she gives birth.
Right, so the early Christians already kind of accepted that she was visited in the end of March 25th,
which might be the origin of the belief of December 25th. So you've got these two different strains, but the entire point of this is whichever one you want to go with. I tend to think there's more for the January 6th, but whichever strain you want to go with here, it's not an argument from paganism, and it's very, very early. There is a very good indication of early belief. Now, there's another thing. When it comes to the evidence for this time, and I know you know about the Roger Beckwith material that is out there called The Courses of the Priests and the Date of Christmas or something like that. But basically, what he does is he adds up. In fact, do you want to explain? Because I think you do a better job of explaining that.
Yeah. So if you look at the book of Luke, chapter 1, Luke chapter 1 gives you the story of Zachariah the priest, Zacharias, who was ministering, and he's visited by an angel and told that he's going to that his wife is going to conceive. He's going to have John the Baptist, and he doesn't believe. He's mute for until the baby's born. He's not able to talk. Now it says when Mary was visited that it was in the 6th month, and it was in the 6th month after Elizabeth was found with child that Mary was visited. So assuming that Elizabeth was found with child immediately after the visit by the angel in the temple, then we can then count when Mary was visited by the angel, but just count 6 months from whenever Zechariah normally was in the temple. Now Zechariah was in a course of the priests called Abaya, and so this course of priests either would minister in the temple either the end of September or the end of March. Assuming that he was visited during his end of September ministering in the temple, that would mean 6 months later Mary was visited by the angel in the end of March, which would mean that she'd be giving birth to Jesus end of December or beginning of January. It's kind of muddy because babies aren't born exactly 9 months after they are conceived. That doesn't usually happen just exactly right, you know. So I think either of those dates are workable. And the point though is they don't stem from myth. They don't stem from ancient beliefs and ancient deities. These are actually historically documented times that when people believed that this happened. Not they didn't adopt it from some other tradition.
Right, and that's the thing is what we're seeing here is a consistent theme that internally, externally, the evidence all points to we have evidence that leads us to this December 25th to January 6th date, somewhere in that time period, without an appeal to paganism, without any sort of external source. And the fact of the matter is, if we're going to accept this idea that Christianity borrowed from paganism here, first of all, you have to explain away the evidence that is completely detached from that. But secondly, in the 2nd to 4th centuries, what you have, which is when very early on there is when you have Christianity sort of finding these dates. But what you have is Christianity is the on the rise one. It's the one taking over. In early 300s, you have them making peace, Rome making peace and stopping the persecution. Suddenly, Rome is a Christian nation and all that sort of stuff. The pagan religions are dead and dying and going away and pitiful and nothing compared to Christianity. Not to mention the fact that they completely contradict everything that Christians believe.
Yeah.
So what you have to believe is that Christianity, for who knows why, decided, you know what, those religions that we're absolutely seal clubbing to death when it comes to the dominant religion of the area, let's go borrow from them. Let's adopt their pagan practices because that just makes sense.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
It makes no sense at all.
Right.
Plus, we also know, like from Josephus and from these other historical sources, that the life of Christ was, actually happened, right? So there's not really a debate about the life of Christ. I mean, he was an historical figure. He did have 12 disciples, all of these things. So let's bring this conversation back and try to squeeze in Mithra here in the last, what do we got, like 6 minutes left?
Right. And by the way, I just want to say really quick, you mentioning the fact of there's historical record. There is historical record, for example, of the crucifixion of Christ. But you know what some of the parallels are that some of these ancient gods supposedly had? Crucified between two thieves. But we have actual historical document from not just biblical sources, but also Roman sources of the crucifixion of Christ. Yeah. So were the Roman historians also borrowing from Horace? Like, what are we supposed to believe here? This is a completely incoherent narrative that we're being sold. There's a bill of goods we're being sold that should be thrown out. But yeah, let's get into this.
So for it to have any weight, we have to look at the historical evidence, if there is any, for the belief in Mithra. Because since we have historical evidence for the actual event of Jesus' life, his 12 disciples, his death on the cross. What is the actual historical evidence for this belief in Mithra? Now, let's do it claim by claim and see if we can fit it in time. Number one, he was born of a virgin. Is that the actual historical belief in Mithra, was that he was born of a virgin?
No, he was born from a rock, which, okay, I suppose you could call that a virgin if you want to. By technicality, sure.
So he actually emerged fully grown out of a rock, right?
Yeah, wearing a hat too, I believe. So that's cool.
It's a better birthday suit than most of us get.
Yeah, well. Yeah, so like, but watch this. Anytime that there is any sort of vaguely close historical parallel between something in the Bible and this is what you're going to get is, oh, born of a virgin, a rock. That's what we're talking about. If there's any source at all, this is the kind of comparison you're going to get.
Okay, how about 25th? Was Mithra in legend? Was he born on the 25th?
Best I can tell, there is no primary source that gives the date. And by the way, this is very important. When we're talking about historical documents, we need to deal with primary sources. Because what you're going to find with things like Zeitgeist is they're going to cite a book. That book is going to cite another book. That book is going to cite another book. And they're all just sort of circle citing each other. There's no primary sources. Primary sources is the original historical documentation. So, like, I can go and read Ignatius to the Ephesians. That's an epistle that a historical person back in that time wrote. I can read that actual historical letter. That is a primary source. But somebody telling me what Ignatius said, that is a secondary source. What you're going to find is no one has primary sources they can cite for most of these claims, including born on December 25th for Mithra.
So he wasn't really born of a virgin. He was born out of a rock. He wasn't, as far as we can tell, there's no historical evidence to say that they actually did worship celebrate his birth on December 25th. Mithra is also said to have had 12 disciples, though. Isn't that true?
Depending on your source, he had one or two. So if you want to combine them, that is 12. 1 and 2. You put 1 in front of 2, that is 12. So
1
I
in
guess
the 10's place and 2 in the 1's place.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, hey, that's at least the best substantiation we've had so far.
Yeah. So no, he didn't actually have 12 disciples. He had 1, or in some versions 2. Okay. How about, did he actually perform miracles?
He killed the bull. That's something he was known for. He killed the bull.
Miraculously killed the bull, or
what?
Did he miraculously?
No. I think that in one of the sculptures you'll see he's like stabbing it in the throat.
Okay, so that's pretty normal. That's how you kill a bull.
Yeah. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, as far as primary sources are concerned, I don't know of any that would mention him performing. Which, by the way, if you're going to have a deity, performing miracles isn't something that makes me go, oh no, because you would think deities probably would perform miracles, right? They're supposed to be like super powerful at least. But that I know of, I don't.
But Mithra, like most deities would have some legend about them performing miracles. Mithra actually doesn't, so that's pretty bad comparison to Christ. How about this though? How about the death and resurrection of Mithra? Was he dead for 3 days and then resurrected?
No, we don't even have a record of him dying.
Really? No record of him dying at all?
In historical record,
being resurrected.
The last I knew, and you can only know so much on the sources, but from primary sources, I don't know of a single record of him actually dying.
So the claim that goes around on YouTube that, oh, Mithra is just like Jesus. He was born of a virgin, born on December 25th, had 12 disciples, performed miracles, was dead for 3 days, was resurrected. All of those are false. He had 1 or 2 disciples. He was born out of a rock, and everything else, there's no actual dates for it. How about the Sunday worship? Was he worshipped on Sunday like Christians worship Jesus?
I don't know on that one. I think there might be a source for that, but here's what you have to remember. The cult of Mithraism really comes up in the Roman area, late 1st, probably early 2nd century. And it's popular between the 2nd and 4th century. It just pretty much killed out. but we have documentation from Christianity that Christians worshipped in the 1st century on Sunday. So even if Mithraism had a Sunday worship, Christianity predates that. We have 1st century documents from Christianity saying that they met on the 1st day of the week.
So even though Mithra was a god from 1200 years before Christ, the actual cult of Mithraism, where they worshipped him on Sunday, if they did worship him on Sunday,
was 2nd century AD.
Was 2nd century. So it would have been after. If anything, they would have been influenced by Christians.
And even Google would tell you that when it came up in Rome was the late 1st or early 2nd century, which is after Christianity.
Right. So we are out of time, but this gives you a taste of what the next couple of weeks are going to be like. We've talked now about why the December 25th was chosen as the day to celebrate Christ. It was always December 25th or January 6th. And we talked about one of the claims that Christ, the legend of Christ, was a myth that came from Mithra, and that's obviously not true. None of the things that are supposedly parallels are actually there. Next week, we're going to talk about Horus. We're going to try to talk about Dionysius. You've probably heard about Horus from Egypt from 3000 BC, born on December 25th, born of a virgin. There was a star from the east. He was adored by 3 kings. He was a teacher at the age of 12. He was baptized, and he started his ministry at the age of 30. And then Dionysius was supposedly born on 25th, was born of a virgin. He was called the King of Kings. He was called the Alpha and the Omega. He was resurrected. And then we're going to talk about the Roman celebration of Saturnalia, the Roman celebration of Natalis Sol Invictus. We're talking about all those different things that people say, oh, that's where you get your Christianity from. It's not true. We're going to show you why. And then we're also going to get into Christmas trees. Are Christmas trees pagan? Did decorating a Christmas tree, does that come from a pagan source? We're going to talk about Santa Claus. A lot of people will say that's a pagan god, something to celebrate other than Jesus. We want to talk about all those things, and it's going to take us at least 2 more episodes to get to it. So join us next Tuesday for Is Christmas Pagan Part 2 here on Point of View. We'll see you next time.
Right next.